Hello, Lana. Welcome to today's session. I'm your trainer, Edith Nyakundi. Today's session is all about introduction to stitches. First of all, we have to understand the meaning of a stitch. A stitch is a process of passing a needle and thread in and out of a fabric. It can also be defined as a way of passing a needle and thread through a fabric. Now we move to rules of working out stitches. The rule number one is choose the right stitch for the work to be carried out. The rule number two, use the correct size of the needle and thread for the correct type of the fabric. That is, thin needle for light fabrics, thick on heavy fabrics. Number three, fasten on and off securely. Number four is wear a thimble in the middle finger for the purpose of protection while stitching. The last one is work one stitch at a time for the purpose of neatness. We move to classification of stitches. Stitches are classified into three groups. Group number one, we have temporary stitches. Group number two, we have permanent stitches. Group number three, we have decorative stitches. Now let's start with the temporary stitches. What are these temporary stitches? These are loosely sewn stitches that are intended to be removed after they have served their purpose. They include, we have tacking. Under tacking, we have even and uneven tacking. The other temporary stitch is slip basting. Let me expound on temporary stitches. We have even tacking. They are used on smooth fabrics and in regular areas, worked from the right to the left side of the garment. Slip, slip basting are used for general tacking for edges that require less control during permanent stitching and marking. They also hold pieces together or match patterns worked from right to the left side. Below are examples of even and slip basting. As you can see, we have even tacking and the other one is slip basting. Here you can see even tacking. It's kind of visible and it has the gaps in between the stitches. You can see the slip basting. It's intact and the stitches are not that visible. Now we move to the second group classification, which is permanent stitches. They are stitches that are worked and not removed once the garment is complete. As the name itself states, permanent. They are divided into two subclassifications, that is joining and neatening. Under these two subclassifications, under joining we have running stitch, we have back stitch and machining. Under neatening, we also have hemming, loop stitch, buttonholing, overcasting, and machining. Here you can see an example of a running stitch, and the other picture shows an example of a back stitch. The back stitch is stronger than the running stitch. Neatening stitches, they are used to bind the raw edges. I gave examples of neatening stitches whereby we said hemming, buttonholing. Now let us see the example of buttonholing. Here you can see it's worked over raw edges or a double edge. It's also worked from left to the right side with the edges held away from the garment worker. This is when sewing the buttonhole stitch. We also had hemming, which is worked from the right to the left side. You can see this is an example of an hemming stitch. The last classification group was decorative stitches. What are these decorative stitches? These are embroidery stitches made on the right side of the garment for the sake of adding beauty. These are decorative stitches. They are meant for the purpose of adding beauty, and they are mostly visible since they can be seen from outside of the garment. These are examples of decorative stitches. Example number one, we have chain stitch, we have satin stitch, we have running stitch, we have stem stitch, we have cross stitch, fishbone stitch, and herringbone. Here is a picture displaying a few examples of the decorative stitches. As you can see, the first one here, we have the running stitch. The second one here, we have the back stitch. We discussed it earlier, the back stitch and the running stitch. We also have the button. We also have the buttonholing. We also have the knots. We have satin stitch. We have the French knot. We have the straight, the chain stitch, stem. We have the woven. We have the fishbone, and we have the blanket stitch, and we have the other one which is flowered, called lazy daisy stitch. That's the end of today's session. I would like to do a recap of what we have covered in today's session. We have looked an introduction to stitches, whereby we said a stitch is a process of passing a needle and thread in and out of a fabric. We also looked at rules for working out stitches. We gave 5 examples, whereby we said the first point was to choose the right stitch for the work to be carried out. The second one, use the correct size of the needle and thread for the correct type of the fabric. That is thin needle for light fabrics and thick on the heavy fabrics. We also said fasten on and off securely. We gave the fourth point as wear a thimble in the middle finger for the purpose of protection. The last one, we said work one stitch at a time for the purpose of neatness. We gave the classification of stitches, whereby we found 3 groups. That was temporal stitch, permanent stitch, and the decorative stitch. Very fast, I go through the temporal stitches. These are loosely sewn stitches that are intended to be removed after they have served their purpose. We gave examples of temporal stitches, whereby we said we have tacking. Under tacking, we gave an example of even and uneven stitch. We also had slip basting. The examples, we show those examples. These are examples of even and slip basting. The second classification was permanent stitches, whereby we say they are worked and not removed once the garment is complete. We gave the examples. That was the running stitch, the back stitch, whereby we said the back stitch is stronger than the running stitch. We also looked at neatening, are used to bind the raw edges. We gave examples, hemming, buttonholing, and here are the examples displayed in form of pictures. The last one, we looked at decorative stitches, whereby we gave many examples such as chain stitch, satin stitch, cross stitch, fishbone stitch, herringbone, etc. That's all for today's session. I thank you very much for your time.